this intellectual capital management lecture. And you remember in the first session we talked about what is intellectual capital, why it is required, and what are the different form of capital and how it is going to add value to the business, right. Now, the question arises that how we are going to measure intellectual capital, right, because unless you know that what is the base of your intellectual capital, whether it is increasing or decreasing, you cannot think about utilizing it effectively or developing your people, or you can say that how you can relate it with the performance of the organization. So, there could be lot of issues related to measurement, and in this context you will find that a number of models have been developed in the literature. Okay. So, we will talk about some of the important models which have been developed to see that how we are going to measure intellectual capital. Okay. And then later on we will also talk about how we are going to create certain indexes based on the intellectual capital, right. So, what we are going to discuss here is basically that what are the various models of intellectual capital management. Okay. Now, the idea is that you are going to put intellectual capital resource to create value for the organization. Okay. So, you have to see that how you can add value through the transformation of intellectual capital into a value, right. It depends upon that how we are going to use various form of capital to create resources to create value for the organization. Okay. Since it is going to be a dynamic factor because it keep on changing. So, you have to see that you need to keep that factor in mind, is basically it is a dynamism so far as resources are concerned, because they keep on changing, okay, like human capital or relational capital, social capital, which is not purely technical, but partly behavioral also. So, you have to see that you need to create a system to navigate your intellectual capital, and this is known as ICN, intellectual capital navigator. So, a lot of efforts have been made by the researchers and professionals in this direction to see to it that how we are going to create intellectual capital. Okay. So, some navigators have been developed, okay, and the most famous navigator that has been developed is known as Scandia, okay, that we will talk about, which is known as intellectual capital navigator, right. If you look at this navigator, it is a numeric and visual representation of how management use resource deployment to create value. Now, see this, when we are talking about resource development to create value, and we have human capital, we have organizational or structural capital, we have social capital, we have relational or customer capital. Okay. These are the different kind of resources that you have at your disposal. So, they are treated as a resource. So, this resource is to be utilized to create value for the organization, right. So, when you go for model building or measuring it, you have to identify what is the value of each of these resources. In the previous lecture, as I told you that they could develop certain indexes to find out an exhaustive list of all kind of capital which could be associated with human capital, organizational or structural capital, social capital and relational capital. So, if you sum it up, you will be able to create an index. This is known as ICI, intellectual capital index. So, you need to navigate it regularly to find out that how we are going to transform these resources to create value for the organization, and that is where these navigators have been developed, and there have been several models that is proposed in the literature, which we are going to discuss now, right. So, when we are talking about intellectual capital navigators, we have to see that what are the various models that have been developed, right. The first company that started this process of identifying intellectual capital and went for navigation is known as Scandia. Okay. Scandia is basically one of the top performing companies. You will find them listed as 500 companies. It is basically a insurance finance area, which it works actually in the insurance and finance area, and it is one of the first company to come out with a report which is known as intellectual capital report. So, they try to measure all kind of capital, whether you call it human capital, structural capital, relational capital or social capital, and they came out with a report which is known as Intellectual Capital Report in 1994. Okay. And the person who did it is known as Leif Edmondson. Okay. So, he was the first director of intellectual capital of a particular firm, okay. And he actually initiated, or you can say he was the architect of this Scandia's initiative to come out with a report on intellectual capital in this company. Okay. So, he is also known as intellectual capital guru, Leif Edmondson, and he also developed a intellectual capital reporting model, which is known as a navigator. So, what we are going to discuss about this is that this was the first attempt made by someone to measure intellectual capital and go for reporting. And this was reported to shareholders, so that shareholders not only know about the book value of a company, but they also know about the market value of a company. Okay. Because there could be a difference between the book value and the market value. Okay. And that is why there was a separate reporting apart from book value about the market value of a company, of this Scandia company, to tell stakeholders, so look, this is the market value of the company, right. And for that he created a model which is known as a navigator, and that is why it is also known as Scandia navigator. Now, if you look at this Scandia navigator, that is how he tried to create a market value, right. So, market value, one thing is known as financial value and the other one is known as intellectual capital. So, if you look at the financial capital, it is nothing else but the value of all physical and monetary assets. Okay. So, if you quantify all physical and monetary things that could be quantified in monetary terms, you will calculate the value in financial capital. Now, when it comes to intellectual capital, it was defined into two parts, that was structural capital and human capital. Now, the most difficult part of measuring intellectual capital is that how are we going to quantify human capital, who thinks basically, right, because he has the knowledge, skill and experience, the competence, which is basically a part of the human capital, or attitude, his motivation, interest, attitude, these kind of things, and also his intellectual ability. It means whether he can imitate, whether he can adopt, whether he can innovate or not. So, all this combines your human capital, right. So, the difficult part when it comes to measurement of intellectual capital is that how are we going to quantify human capital. Now, apart from human capital, which is the thinking part, which is very dynamic in nature, comes to structural part, which is non-thinking part, because that is what you call a static and ideal part, while human capital is more dynamic, right. So, here you have two different form, that is customer capital and organizational capital. Now, when we are talking about customer capital, it included things like what you call customers, suppliers, shareholders, what kind of strategic partnership you have, right. And when we are talking about organizational capital, it includes the kind of infrastructure you had, processes, systems and culture that you had in organization, right. And out of all this organizational capital, you have innovation capital, okay, and also process capital. So, innovation capital included your intellectual property and your intangible assets, right. Intangible, which is very difficult to quantify and monitor, measure it, right. We will talk about these assets at a later stage. And then you have process capital. Process capital, what are the different systems and processes that you follow. So, if you look at this Scandia model, the idea of developing this Scandia model was to calculate the market value of company, which is going to be different from the book value of the organization, right. And if you are able to calculate the market value of company, that is nothing else but a sum of what you call all capital combined in the form of known as intellectual capital, right. So, the idea was not to go by book value, but go by market value. So, what Edmondson reported for this company was the market value. Okay. As a part of the intellectual reporting, Edmondson reported the market value of the company, and he found that this market value of the company was much higher than the book value of the company, right. Moving further, if you look at this navigator, okay, which was developed by Edmondson, if you look at this line, this line. Now, if you look at this line, this is the intellectual capital, okay. This is showing, this is the financial capital which can be easily quantified. Now, as a part of intellectual capital, you have human capital, process capital and customer capital, right. So, in the past we used to focus more on financial capital, right, because your book value shows the status of your finance, right, which is nothing else but in, for example, your balance sheet, which shows what? The various type of assets and liabilities that an organization has, okay. And that is how you try to calculate the value of an organization, right, based on the financial capital. He said that it is a thing of the past. Today, we should focus more on market value of company, which is a combination of these three major values, right. That is, what is the basis of your human capital, what is the process capital that you have and what is the customer capital. So, today you are going to measure intellectual capital in terms of these type of capital, right. Maybe tomorrow he says, if you look at the last point, he says that you are going to see this or measure it, this intellectual capital on the basis of two things, that is whether organization is able to renew itself in terms of redefining the structure, system, processes, culture, capabilities of the people or the customers or not, and whether he is able to develop them. Okay. So, what kind of intellectual capital that you are going to have tomorrow is based upon renewal and development exercise that you are going to carry out with them, okay. Because not necessary that your intellectual capital base that you have today will continue tomorrow, unless you go for renewal and development. Okay. So, if you are not going for renewal development, if you do not continuously improvise, innovate and improve and develop yourself, the intellectual capital base of your organization may go down. Okay. And that is why he said that it is an exercise that is to be carried out on a regular basis to ensure that the intellectual capital base of your organization improves on continuously, right. And that is how you can navigate what is the status of your intellectual capital in the organization, right. So, moving from the past to the present to the future, you have to see that what kind of measures you need to adopt in order to see the value of intellectual capital, right. So, apart from this Scandia model, in the literature also discusses certain other models, okay. But before we discuss, we look at this intellectual capital measures that we have. Okay. So, if you look at this Scandia's value scheme, it includes both financial and as well as non-financial estimates for the market value. Okay. Now, if you look at Scandia measures, intellectual capital measures, I am not getting into detail, but I am just trying to tell you that what are the various tools that they use to measure this. So, it includes 91 intellectual capital measures, that is the metrics that they have developed on those 4 type of intellectual capital, and they also have 73 traditional accounting measures in 5 focus areas. So, they concentrate on 5 focus areas and they try to measure it in both terms, financial terms and also non-financial terms. So, if you look at this Scandia measure, okay, so it starts with financial focus. Okay. So, these are some of the examples, not the exhaustive list, because this includes around 100 something plus. So, some of them are taken here as an example to explain you what are the various intellectual capital measures as a part of these 5 focus areas, right. So, start with financial focus. So, financial focus, say for example, they try to see how much revenue is generated by per employees. See how many companies today try to assess that how much revenue is generated by per employees, because depending upon the level of employees, the kind of revenue that you are going to generate is going to vary, right. And then how you are going to assess that who is going to contribute how much. So, it is a very difficult issue, but they try to examine it in a very objective way using both financial as well as non-financial measures. Okay. So, they, for example, they try to measure that how much revenue are going to get from the new customers, and to what extent it is a part of the total revenue in terms of say percentage, and then you quantify in dollar terms, right. How much profit has resulted from new business operations. Okay. So, the focus primarily here is on finance, right. How much profit revenue is being generated through different activities of the organization, that is the first focus. Second is on customers. Okay. So, you are going to see days spent visiting customers, say for if customer is the focus, then you have to approach customers, you have to go for a deal, and then ultimately you have to close the deal, right. Ratio of sales contacts to sales close. Suppose you have contacted 100 people, but you have to been able to materialize only 20 sales, that is close. So, your record is only 20%, right. The number of customers gained versus lost, in the process how many customers you have lost, how many new customers you have gained. So, you can go for percentage. So, if you look at this measure, it is using different kind of measure, financial measure as well non financial measures both, to identify how much what is the value of intellectual capital across different functional areas. So, we started with finance, moving to customers. Now, if you look at this, the three other areas, that is process, that is a part of process capital. How many PCs you have per employees, what is the IT capacities in terms of CPUs, what is the processing time, right. Then renewal and development focus finally, right. What is the employee satisfaction index, how much training expenses you have, what is the percentage of business from new products, okay, and what is the average age of patents, okay. That is going to say that how many products you have, patents are coming up in the future, and how many new patents have been filed up. So, if you look at this Scandia measure, you find that they have basically focused on all four aspects: finance, customer, process, and renewal and development focus, and finally, on human factors. So, human factors focus, if you look at it, it means that what is the average qualification of the people, how many people have what kind of qualification. Okay. So, how many people are managers, have advanced degrees, how many masters you have, how many engineers you have, how many MBAs you have. Then what is the turnover rate of the employees, because turnover rate shows that yes, your company is something not good which people would like to work for, right. What is the leadership index? So, you are also going to measure the leadership quality of the organization on an average, right. So, if you look at the Scandia measure of which is developed by Edwinson and reported by Bontes in his book, it suggests that you have to adopt certain measures to basically quantify your intellectual capital base, which represents your market value, which is different from book value, right. And it is always good to go for market value, because nowadays people are driven by market value, not book value of a company. I am not saying that financial strength of a company is not something that is not desirable, but you will find that people would like to invest in a company, say for example, which is growing, which has a potential for growth, right, and that can be identified from the intellectual base of the company. So, if you find that intellectual capital of a company is good enough, that you can also take a decision to invest in that kind of company, okay, because there the stakes are going to be high compared to a company which might be having a good financial base, or the book value will be reflecting good, but at the same time the intellectual capital index is not that good. Okay. So, even if the book value is higher than the market value, it is not a desirable situation. If the market value exceeds book value, then it is always good, and that is why we are going to measure intellectual capital using different parameters, right. So, we have talked about Scandia measures. Apart from Scandia measures, there are other measures. So, look at some of the what you call the strength and weaknesses of this model. Okay. So, this was the first attempt to create a taxonomy to measure intellectual capital. It recognizes the importance of various other capitals, not only financial capitals like attributes, processes, patents, customers, even social relationship in creating value for the organization. The only thing is that you for everything that you have to assign a say monetary value, and sometimes it is not possible to get a monetary value. You can, it is very difficult to quantify certain qualitative attributes. Okay. So, what you do, you are going to use certain proxy measures for that, so that you can add value to it. Okay. Rose suggests that every company would need to have a unique understanding of which intangible assets are available and to identify appropriate measures. That how are we going to measure it? Okay. So, it is very difficult to find out generic measures to have benchmarks of intellectual capital across firms and industries. So, it is going to be very specific for a particular company. You cannot compare using two companies using the same measures, because there is no benchmark, right. So, these are some of the strengths and weaknesses of this navigator model, but it is still in use, and what companies are doing, they are using different models to see that what kind of intellectual capital base is coming up, right. So, apart from Scandia model, we will discuss some other models, that is known as VISE, which is known as value added intellectual capital, okay, developed by Antipolix, and he basically tried to look at the efficiency of key resources in the business organization. And he said that you have to find out what are the various resources which add value to the business. Okay. So, adding value and creating wealth will become more important. And he, if you look at some of the capital that he uses, more or less it is same, like physical capital, human capital, structural capital. Okay. And he perceives that human capital is an investment. It means that you need to appreciate this human capital by investing more in their HRD interventions, and now that is how the value of human capital appreciates. And he said that if you are going to add more value, provided output is more than the input, right. So, value added intellectual coefficient is defined through human capital coefficient, structural capital coefficient, and physical capital employed coefficient. So, he is going to create and see that how these different coefficients, which is represented through beta weights, is going to predict the outcome. Okay. It means that you have to see that in what way, at what level these capital are going to contribute to output or the value that is being created for the organization, right. So, it is more technical, I am not getting into the detail, but what I am trying to tell you that these capital become the independent variable and your output is the dependent measure, that value that is created. So, you are using these resources to create a value. So, you have to find out that the extent to which each of these capital is going to create value for the organization. Now, moving further, the other measures also, see how the intellectual capital is reported in the organization. See here. Now, if you look at this picture, on the top you will find market and the general market, and down the line you will find knowledge market. Knowledge market means that reflects your intellectual capital, right. And you are going to measure results depending upon the kind of productivity or profits that you make, that is a financial measure, and you can use various financial measures like return on assets, return on total assets, profits, okay, before tax, after tax, you can use a lot of financial measures it. Then the kind of knowledge that is created. Okay. So, what is the knowledge base in terms of products, processes, and these kind of things that is there. Then immaterial, something that cannot be materialized, quantified, okay, in terms of relationship and these kind of things, right. So, that could be the outcome. Now, this outcome is achieved through a value creation process, okay. And if you look at this, you will find it has been identified not in financial terms, but it is identified in non financial terms. That is, you have to look at the market value by using the same terms of book value using the same terms of assets and liabilities. Okay. So, in this case you will find that assets are related to your people, structure and relationship, okay. And they could also be treated as liabilities depending upon how you are going to utilize them, right. So, if you look at the value creation process, it takes place through these assets. Okay. So, if asset is higher or liability is higher, that is going to decide the kind of value that you are going to create, and it is an extra financial measures. Okay. But ultimately it starts with what? What exactly organization is looking forward to? The motivation behind this kind of analysis or reporting is the vision that you are going to achieve, or what is your goal, what organization wants to do in future, from this level where organization wants to go. Suppose in 2017 you have certain goals or vision, okay. as an institution. Now, where you want to go say down the line say 5 years in 2025, what would be your position? What is going to be your knowledge goals in terms of what kind of knowledge that you are going to create, and in the process how your mission statement is going to help you to achieve it, right. Then from there you need to develop certain strategies, execution strategies to see that this value is created, right. Then you have to see that who is going to be engaged in that, who will be the participants, the stakeholders in the process, and then what processes you are going to adopt to identify various kind of capitals and who is going to be engaged there. Okay. With the help of this, probably you are going to see that you are going to make use of these resources, sorry, assets to create value, which is not a financial measure, but it is a non financial measure, extra financial measure. Okay. So, when you are going to use these non financial measures or extra financial measure, and you are going to results which may be financial as well, you can say yes, this intellectual capital base has gone up, right, and then you are going to compare it, okay, that whether your intellectual capital base has improved or appreciated over a period of time or not. Say for example, if your intellectual capital index is x in 2017, okay, so if it moves to x 1 in 2018 and it becomes x 1 plus 1 in 2019, it means the total value of your intellectual capital is appreciating over a period of time. And if it is not happening, then it means there is something wrong with your intellectual capital, it means that is depreciating over a period of time. If you are using a resource based view and treating intellectual capital as resource, so you have to see that how this resource can be utilized to create value for the organization, which results in what you call better finances, better knowledge management and better materials for the organization, right. So, the idea of intellectual capital reporting is to find out what is the value of intellectual intellectual capital through a certain index, it could be monetary or non monetary, and see whether it is appreciating or not in the different time period, right, and that is why we go for this kind of thing. Thank you very much.